Look at these numbers here, guys. Totally different story. Obsessed with the games we saw this weekend and the ways they highlighted a few things that we are passionate about. And so we're going to dive into those things today on the Zoomer Sports Show. The ways defenses should approach these multi-tight end sets. We've talked so much about this year. We had very good examples set for us in the Seahawks-Rams game. I know it's hard to follow personnel groupings and coverages as the game is happening live, so Sam Bruckhouse has pulled the data, and Shawn Syed will be here to explain the scheme. We're also going to discuss the end of the Dolphins-Commanders game and the concept of taking the points rather than going for it on fourth down. What are coaches being advised to do by the data team and why? We're going to talk to Seth Walder from ESPN, who has the answer to that question. In the meantime, I'm Lindsay Rhodes with, as always, the one and only Sam Bruckhouse.
Hi. This was an excellent weekend of football. We got 3 or 4, or really all the games are premium, but in particular, it felt like this Rams Seahawks game was like the nerdiest nerd game of all nerddom.
100%.
And it was so fun to watch because it wasn't necessarily what we expected, but it was still a lot of cool stuff going on.
It was the perfect example of like the chess match that we talk about a lot of times, right? Like, what are you going to do? How am I going to defend it? And then also what on the surface looked like it might have been some bad football. Like both quarterbacks had relatively bad games for them, terrible games by their standards this season in particular. But then there are layers of like, how much does the defense and what the defense was doing against what they wanted to do was responsible for that? And how much was just them having an off day? There are so many layers to this game that are perfect for us. Going into it, the reason that I was the most excited about this game than maybe any game that I've seen so far this season was because we've talked so much about these heavy tight end sets and going 12 and 13 and how teams are doing that and why they're doing that in terms of what they're trying to get the defense to do. This was a fascinating matchup because you have two teams who are doing that both at a high rate with their tight ends on offense. And so therefore, one could assume they understand why they're trying to do it is to get the defense in a specific look so they can have success. So if they know that they, as now defensive coaches, people that have to also be responsible for what the defense is going to do in this game, they know that they're going to face that from the opposing offense. How do they defend that? And I thought that this was a fascinating example. We got a lot of answers. What did you see?
Yeah, so when you look on the offensive side of the ball, these are two teams that will trot out 2 or 3 tight ends or 2 or 3 big bodies in the case of the Seahawks, more than pretty much any other team. You look particularly at the Rams, they have fallen in love with 13 personnel in recent weeks. They're now running, they've run it close to 100 times, in which they're like really the only team who have remotely gotten close to that.
By far the most in the league.
Correct. And, it ends up being around 15, 16% of their plays, but in recent weeks, it's been a lot higher. This has been an 11 personnel team for going back for years. And now they've kind of changed their MO to do some more unique things. Flip that over to the Seahawks. This is a team that is a very low pass rate team typically, but when they do pass, they are able to get great efficiency gains, which we've talked about on previous episodes, by trotting out 12 personnel, by putting Elijah Arroyo, AJ Barner, and Robbie Oots, the fullback, out there and pass from those sets, despite not having the best running game of all time. But then the question was, both of these defenses were extremely unique as well. You got 2 excellent kind of slot hybrid DBs on the Seahawks. And so it was going to be really interesting to see how they matched 13 personnel. And on the flip side, you got some of the best safeties in the league on the Rams defense. And they've been playing a lot of dime. They've been playing a lot of nickel. So that was what we were kind of looking for, Lindsay. And frankly, that's what we got.
We did see from a Rams standpoint, a little bit less of the 13 personnel than we saw the 2 weeks prior. Still a very high rate relative to the rest of the league. By the way, they're the only team in the NFL that uses more 13 than 12, meaning that if they're going to put multi-tight ends on the field, more often than not, they're going to put 3 of them on the field and not 2. It went down this week. Was that because they didn't get the defensive looks? Was it something that was consistent the entire game that was never part of their strategy, or did they have to move away from it as the game went on?
So let's just start off with the top question. Like, what did they do? On 32 total plays, they went 11 personnel. On 18 total plays, they went 13 personnel. So it was still a good number of plays, and they remained sort of consistent in the ratio that they were running it throughout the game. The difference is the Seahawks just wiped it off the map. Mike McDonald really just shut down 13 personnel in this game. And the way they did it is by just not being afraid to trot out Nick Emenwari as a third linebacker and just say, congratulations, try to run, try to get stuff off, but you're not going to be able to run and pass against this defense. So I'm really excited for Shawn's breakdown of what they're going to do. But I got to say, like, against this 13 personnel package that has given teams fits, the Seahawks played substantially more nickel than almost any other team has been willing to do. This package has been matched almost solely by base by other teams, 92.78% of the time. We've seen other teams match this with base. That is just not what they got from the Seahawks. The Seahawks really just walked up and said, this is what we're going to do 66% of the time. We're going to play nickel. They played base kind of more in those short yardage situations. And so they were really doing what kind of Mike McDonald talked about in his press conference before the game. They were really playing how they thought Stafford and Puka and Sean McVay were going to attack the team rather than necessarily that there were 3 tight ends on the field. They switched it up when the Rams went 11 personnel as well. They trotted out dime 14 times. So about half and half nickel and dime against 11 personnel. This was a true game from Mike McDonald where he was saying, we are going to cover the field and we're going to cover what you want to do because we think we have the personnel to do it. And it leads to one of the worst games of Matthew Stafford's career. And so you got to say it was successful. Now, question becomes, can other teams take this and run with it? I don't know. It's really difficult to trot out the level of talent that the Seahawks have. But if you do have that level of Seahawks talent, and I do want to mention, you think of the Ravens where Mike McDonald was, you think of the Chargers, they both have those kind of level of safeties and slot corners. They also do this quite a bit as well. So it is a defined decision. It's definitely a defined personnel decision. You think about Nick Emenwari was drafted this year. They trade up for him in the second round. But this is what Mike McDonald wants to do, and it really worked against the Rams.
Real quickly, in the interest of being clear for people who maybe are like, we're using some phrases here that maybe not everybody understands. Base defense, for purposes of this conversation, is primarily we're talking about the DBs. And there are lots of different ways to describe base, but in this case, we think it's like 4 defensive backs on the field, right? Nickel is with 5 defensive backs on the field, and dime is with 6.
If you see Nick Emenwari on the field, it's probably going to be nickel for the Seahawks. And so there's these different types of body types. Like Quentin Lake, for example, is the slot corner nickel back, and that's a very radically different body type than Nick Emenwari. He was like 6'4", 225 pounds. You think guys like Cooper DeJean, that's another nickel back. So it's really just the number of DBs. 4 is base, 5 is nickel, 6 is dime.
It's interesting here, and this is sort of an aside. Base traditionally has meant your base defense, meaning the defense that you play most frequently and build your whole defense around. Like, this is the kind of defense that we run. I feel like that's actually not true anymore. It's kind of like standard scoring in fantasy is not actually standard anymore. Standard is PPR. That's one of these types of situations where actually the league predominantly uses nickel now.
Exactly. And you look at the Rams, and the Rams are going to match 11 personnel, which is typically the most utilized personnel. They're going to match that with dime. And they've done that throughout the year. The Seahawks basically became an 11 team as this game went on. I think there was a little bit of game script to that. There's a little bit of the way that the defense was approaching it. And I think also getting Cooper Kupp back and adding Rashid Shaheed into the fold also allowed them to run a little bit more 11. But the Rams played substantially more dime against 11 personnel than the Seahawks have seen basically all year. I mean, for most of the part during the year, 81% they were getting 11 matched with nickel. Now, they typically don't run 11 personnel as much as other teams, only about 33, 35%. They ended up running it on about half of the plays and on 65% of those, 26 times. the Rams matched with dime. So the Rams like to trot out dime against like the base 11 personnel type stuff.
Yeah, and we've talked about that a lot this year too, or at times, about the fact that they put 6 DBs on the field so frequently, and they're a little bit anomalous in that sense. Let's bring Shawn into the conversation right now, our scheme guy here at Sumer Sports. Hi, Shawn. This was such a fun game for, I think, all of us nerds to watch for so many different reasons. As Sam said earlier, McDonald wiped 13 off the map to a degree. What did you see that you thought was interesting about the ways that they went about doing that?
When I was watching it, it very much was, hey, when your defensive front is just better than the five guys across from you, you're going to be able to create a lot of chaos. So I really liked McDonald saying, I know you're going to put out 13 personnel. I don't need to change what I'm doing. Like McDonald this year has one of the lower blitz rates among defensive coordinators, and McDonald can scheme with anyone. Like you see one overload pressure per week that is just beautiful. He can beat you on a chalkboard, but also he trusts his front four. So when you're looking at like from a schematic perspective, well, how do I recommend to another defensive coordinator? What do you learn from the Seahawks, their ability to stop that 13 personnel? I mean, I don't know, have four awesome guys up front and a rotation that's like 8 deep that are constantly able to win. So I really like Seattle trusting what they do. And they did, get a little bit different just in terms of your front. You're changing things a little bit. You're manipulating. Well, how does the double team work for the offense in this look against that look? But just like from a beating double teams perspective, if you're the Seahawks, you're like, all right, no one's going to be able to push us around. So that was fun to see from Seattle.
So Shawn, I like that you mentioned this was a decision that starts with personnel, because I think you can go on the flip side of that as well and look at what the Rams did. And so I guess that's what my biggest question is. We have these two pretty tough games from the offense, in particular from two quarterbacks who have been playing at a pretty high level. How much of this was these defenses are really, really good and have excellent fronts and great defensive backs, and how much of it was the quarterbacks just not being able to filter out what was going on any given play?
Yeah, I think it has to be a little bit of both and probably different kind of across the two circumstances, where I do think Sam Darnold played a little bit better than just looking at it and seeing 4 interceptions is going to indicate. I'm not going to say he played the best game that ever happened. I think the next time they play in a month, the most likely outcome is Darnold is not going to throw 4 interceptions. I thought the Rams did a really good job of affecting him in the pocket, get him kind of, how many times you see him turn around on play action? Like usually that first read is there. Now you have to get to your second read kind of quick. And I thought they did a good job from the secondary, just kind of playing off his eyes, have safeties closing on things and robbing some of those routes. So I do think that the Rams defense deserves a lot of credit there. Donald, of course, didn't have the we're not hanging this game in the rafters. And on the opposite side, I do think the Rams just have maybe more offensive answers that they can get to, where 13 personnel, we talked about it, right? It was nothing. It was nothing for them in this game. From 11 personnel, though, they do still have so much, I think, that they can do. And even the Seahawks against the Rams, a little bit later on in the game, the Seahawks offense was able to have some success out of 11. So as much as we do the 12 personnel and 13 personnel, we still live in a league that is 11 personnel offense against nickel defense. Can you get your best pass catchers on the field against the defense's best pass defenders? And, are you going to be able to make that drive late in the game?
So another item that I think I'm interested in is these two defenses do lean on their safeties. We talked about Kobe Bryant as a midseason All-Pro. We've talked about Cameron Kitchens. Can you talk a little bit how they were disguising what they were doing? Did you see a lot of, middle of the field, close to middle field open? Were they just playing excellent coverage? What were you seeing from those excellent personnel guys and their deployment from their defense coordinators?
And the effect it had on Sam Darnold, because look at these numbers here, guys. Totally different story for Sam when the defense showed one middle of the field look pre-snap and changed it post-snap versus when the look was the same pre and post.
Definitely a little bit of coverage rotation. It's not like it wasn't like sometimes you'll get some of these Brian Flores ones and you're like, I mean, how does he even think of that? So I wouldn't say it was at that level, but still enough, I think, to make things difficult. You mentioned Kitchens. I thought he had the interception where he's robbing across. Like, that's a really nice job. You're continuing to hunt. You're attacking the quarterback's eyes. When he has to take an extra second to throw, you're going to be able to come away with that ball. So I do think it was a good day overall from the safeties. But I mean, this, to me, the fronts in this game are absolutely the thing that had the most impact kind of in both directions.
It's funny because you said, and I tend to agree with you, that the next time that they play, we're probably not going to see a 4 interception game from Sam Darnold. But then also you look at when the Vikings played the Rams at the end of the year last year, and guess what happened? Sam Darnold had a terrible, terrible game that started the whole downfall narrative at the end of the year that led to him leaving Minnesota. So I do kind of wonder if there is something specific about facing the Rams that is impacting him in the way that we're seeing it play out in this type of way where there are 4 interceptions. Agreed, he won't throw 4 interceptions regularly, but is there something that we're seeing from the Rams that is giving him difficulty where we're seeing his worst games come against them?
I do think Shula does a good job and has done a good job this entire year. I think he probably is deserving of being in some head coaching conversations as we get into the offseason, just how your safeties are literally matching routes and kind of what they're doing based on what the quarterback's doing. I do like a lot of that, but I mean, this, like the effect that you're able to have on Darnold, where that Vikings game last year is a ton of sacks. I think it was like 9 sacks or something like this. And this game, those interceptions, you're creating some of that pressure. Like, I don't want to take any credit away from, like, these schemes are nice. They are fun to go through. They're fun to break down. The front, like I keep putting to the front, like just draft guys that are really, really good up front that are able to cause a bunch of havoc. I think Gray's Abel was injured in this game, so I'm curious how long that's going to last, how that sorts of turns over, because what the Seahawks have done so good for part of this season is just limiting the amount of pure drop back. Like, I need to take the snap. I need to sit in the pocket for 2.7, 2.8 seconds and be able to find a receiver downfield. And the Rams want to make you do that over and over because eventually those guys are just going to be able to kind of beat you up front.
So I like kind of that framing because the Seahawks have a murderer's row of defenses coming up. They have to face the Rams again. They have to face several other teams, notably the Colts, and that have been really doing a good job on defense as well. Do you think that defenses will play to their personnel, or do you think that they will be able to continue matching kind of light against this team because they can't run, in particular with regards to the Seahawks?
You know, most teams are not as uniquely suited as the Rams are to deal with the Seahawks. So at the same time, where I feel like we learned a lot in this game, I also kind of feel like we learned a little bit of nothing, just because how many teams are really able to replicate the Rams front, play dime kind of at that consistent basis, and, you know, say like, all right, just like try and beat us inside, see what you can do. So I wonder how teams are going to adjust, because I still think defenses are going to say, all right, well, we're just going to kind of put our best 11 out there kind of in down and distance based on your personnel type situation. So I'm curious how the Vikings game is going to go, where, of course, Flores is going to have light bodies, even though he can kind of get crumpled up in the box. I wonder how the Vikings are going to attack that interior part of the Seahawks offensive line. So I think that's like the specific game that I'm looking for a lot on that schedule. I think that's the end of November coming up.
Right. And so on the flip side, on the offensive side of the ball, this game kind of down the stretch, the Rams were still running a little bit of 13 personnel throughout the game, but down the stretch, this really became, 11 personnel on 11 personnel. Let's line them up and see who the best team is. And it really kind of came down to both of these defenses are really, really good. Thinking about those Vikings matchups and the Colts matchup and so forth and so on, and the rest of the Rams schedule as well, do you think that we will see them try to dominate with talent on offense and 11 personnel, or do you think we will continue to see them be able to take advantage of lesser defenses by utilizing strange personnels?
I mean, yeah, looking at the Rams schedule, you have the Panthers, the Cardinals, the Bucks coming up this week. I think that's a Sunday night game. So, I think McVay knows, like, I am getting to 13 personnel to create a certain response from a defense. Like, that's what all this is about. All the 12, all the 13, blah, 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 is about, can I find a way to get the defense to play exactly how I want them to? And you're not able to do that against the Seahawks. The same way I said the Rams are uniquely suited to deal with the Seahawks offense. The Seahawks defense is uniquely suited to deal with the Rams offense. So I still think McVay will get into some of that kind of those 13 looks just to see, like, all right, are you going to be like playing base consistent? I think the Buccaneers play base at a fairly high rate, where they're also successful out of some of their lighter looks. So I think McVay will get to that, but like crunch time, down the stretch of a game, I mean, we're going to see 11 personnel. Like that's your best kind of overall grouping, I think, from like hey, how do we pass on nickel when we're not able to kind of force you into the box in different ways? So if anything, like we talk about, hey, this is a really good argument for having these awesome like nickel corners or nickel kind of safeties, that big nickel type body. It's also nice to have a third receiver on your team that you're really happy with.
I think we can't beat that last point that you made home enough. That this is strategically to get looks that you want to get that are advantageous for you to many times pass the ball with efficiency down the field. So if the defense doesn't give you that look, then this goes away. That brings up a separate point because now you've got a defense, some defenses here that we're talking about that said, like, I dare you, run it. That's fine. Like, we're going to take away your pass. We clearly have seen a lot of defenses not do that and feel like they need to get into base to affect the run game or account for the run game. How much are you seeing teams still doing that, even though we're starting to have this conversation about don't bite, don't fall for it? How much are teams still falling for it? And do you think we're moving in a direction where we will stop seeing these multi-tight end sets because teams are starting to catch up?
I guess I see it less as like falling for it and more as like we don't feel like we're going to be able to like play good defense kind of out of this look. I do think defenses are a little bit too much of doing you put a second tight end, let's immediately get base personnel kind of on the field. But a lot of those teams, I think, don't feel the same comfort in their front as the Seahawks and the Rams. So if anything, it's like, okay, we think of defensive line as a premium position. Now it's a super premium position because of all the things that it unlocks on the defensive end. I do want to see more teams say, I think it's hard because it's a little bit of a prideful thing, a little bit of just like a natural thing. When you watch a team just run for 5 yards, 6 yards, 4 yards, like there is something I think like physically demoralizing about that on a football field. But there are times when you get that 1 yard gain. Now we're in 2nd and 9. It becomes 3rd and 8 and you become in a more positive situation. So for me, it's not my job on the line. Like I'd like to see some teams say like, you know what, just prove it to us. And I think playing against the Seahawks, that at this point, this is just like, this is the right approach. Like they're totally different running the ball. You see a little bit of success against the Rams, like make them prove it to you over and over and over again, because you have to do something to make sure you're not getting beat by some of those play action passes.
I think that was a really interesting point as well, because you think about this Rams offense for the past 3 years has basically been a success rate running offense. And frankly, when they were able to move the ball in the first half and kind of get up on the Seahawks and it felt like the game may get out of control, it was because they were doing that success rate running. Mike McDonald stayed firm in the way that he approached their offense. Sure enough, the success rate dried out, as it typically does when you face a good defense.
When you say success rate running, clarify that. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, so when I'm talking about success rate, it means that you're getting the 3 and 4 yards necessary to kind of stay in front of the chains. The way that we quantify that is terms of expected points added. It's over 0 if you are adding points in quotes to what we expect you to get each play. Then you are having a successful play. What that typically checks out to be is like 3 or 4 yards on 1st down. Then you cut it down to 3rd and short on 3rd down, and then you convert on 3rd and 4th down. That's typically how it works. And so when you're not having explosive runs, which we saw like maybe 1 or 2 from Kyren Williams, but for the most part, it was those kind of chunk runs, but not necessarily breaking it off for a big 1st down or a touchdown, which we saw in the first half. That was when they were really able to move the ball. And moreover, that's when they were able to get to the pass. In a certain manner, they were able to do those McVay things where everything looks the same. But once the Seahawks really buckled down, even though they were still matching, they were able to both stop the run and the pass by really sticking to their guns and staying in those light boxes.
Shawn Syed, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Look, I'm excited for the next one. I'm excited for a month from now. I need the game now. It's going to be a fun one.
Interestingly, that next matchup between these two teams is going to be in week 16 on Thursday night, which means, Sam, that we can watch it on Prime Vision, which is the perfect way to watch that game because of the pre-snap identifier technology, which I thought that game on Sunday begged for. You're talking about multi-tight end sets. Most of us can't see which players are on the field and where the tight ends, but we will be able to see that with Prime Vision, which labels the skill position players before the play. So excited for that. Also excited to talk about our next topic, which could broadly be described as take the points? ? Miami sparked quite a firestorm early on Sunday morning when they passed up what the audience perceived as points by not kicking a field goal at the end of regulation, choosing to go for it on 4th and 1 instead. They did not convert. People lost their minds, despite the fact that Miami did go on to win the game. And as soon as the game was over, the NFL Network studio took over, and the general theme of the conversation immediately was, why don't teams just take the points? And that is the question that I want to attempt to answer today on this show. Not to say McDaniel was right or wrong, but why he did what he did, because, Sam, there were reasons. And for that conversation, we welcome in Seth Walder, quantitative analysis expert from ESPN. Seth, what are teams being armed with for these situations from a data and logic standpoint?
Yeah, sure. Hey, guys. So when teams are evaluating these decisions, the first, what they're doing generally, like beforehand, not during the game, is they're building fourth down decision models. So this is using win probability, using your expected conversion rates, and considering it. You can think about it exactly how they do this, right? You're saying, like, in any given circumstance, what would be my win probability if I go for it and I convert? What would be my win probability if I go for it and I fail? What would be the win probability if I kick and convert, kick and fail? And then you weight those by the likelihood of each of them happening. And so that's like not that complex. What's complex is creating the win probability formula, trying to figure out what your exact conversion probability is. There are definitely complexities there, but that's in essence what they're trying to do. When they're in game, it is not as simple as just asking the model, because they're not allowed to use a model in game. They can't have their laptop there and take the live feed and then spit it out. The way that, like, at home, like when I watch a game, I have our little look ahead tool and I can see, like, okay, it's first down. They should go for it if it's 4th and 3 or shorter. They don't have the luxury of that. So they have to create some sort of shortcut for themselves, like a binder or a big chart or something like that, some analog version of this complex thing. And then they can make the decision based off of that. So they're printing out sort of like many permutations of what is possible, and then trying to get as close to that as possible to make their judgment. The key is that on first down, you always know what the fourth down is going to be, right? If it's 1st and 10 at midfield, you know that if it is 4th and 2, it will be at the 42. And so that helps you make that decision in advance.
Right. So in my experience, having played at Tulane, like, we had someone literally following the head coach with the big binder, and they were relaying that information extremely early.
I think it's one of the things that you can always tell is if a team has to call a timeout to make a decision, then they have already screwed up their process, because you had minutes to make that choice ahead of time.
That's fascinating. Actually, that's a really interesting point that I hadn't thought about.
Yeah, I think it's such a sign of process. It's like you should have that organization. I'll give one tiny exception, which would be like the very end of the game, the clock. You might not know how much clock is going to be left. So that is one very minor exception, but 99% of the time, you know exactly the scenario. And so I think it's hard. I understand a head coach is probably sitting here saying, well, okay, yeah, but I cannot think about this until this moment, right? Like, the head coach is dealing with all these different things. But I would say, if you're a head coach, you really probably need to outsource this. You could have an opinion going into the game saying, like, feel like, well, maybe we feel like on long fourth downs, we can attack them better than normal or whatever, but you should outsource the ultimate call to someone in the booth who can make that decision on first down.
What are some of the things that are going into the win probability models? Like, what are some of the things that someone sitting at home who's yelling, take the points, might not be taking into consideration?
I think that, okay, so win probability models is going to be like all the factors of the game. So down, distance, score, clock, field position, where you are, down and distance. And the thing, though, I think when it comes to the decision making and what is, like you said, the person at home, what are they missing there? There's probably two things that jump out to me immediately. The first is you got considering the field position in the event of a failure. So a lot of times, one of the more controversial in the past sort of fourth down scenarios have been tight up against the goal line. And what you have to consider is that if you convert, obviously you're trying to score a touchdown. That's great. If you fail, you're you're leaving the opponent at, say, their own 3-yard line. That's a big difference in field position when it comes to, if you kick the field goal and then you're giving them the ball at the 30, 31, something like that.
There's a real quantitative difference between giving the Commanders the ball at the, I don't even know, the inch line practically, as compared to 3 points, and now all of a sudden you're getting the ball at the 30 or the 35.
Yes, that is like a huge part of that decision. No question about it. You're also in a limited time window spot, right? So if you fail, give the ball at the 1. It's not literally just can they complete the drive, but can they complete it in that amount of time? I think that the other thing that happens is, in that case, and a lot of cases, is conflating winning versus tying. And those two things are very different. Tying is winning half the time. People are often optimizing for their ability to win or tie when it should be to win.
Which is obviously the goal. I'm going to come back to the Dolphins game and that specific example in just a second. But first, I want to take a quick detour to the Rams-Seahawks game, which I think provides us with a few different examples that no one is talking about now for 2 reasons. 1, they happened early in the game. And 2, they were successful. And people tend to focus on go for it versus kick scenarios when they do not succeed. And then in people's minds, they cost them the game, as opposed to reframing it as, oh, that did work and they won the game as a result of that. We don't talk about that enough. If there's like a few things that are on my list of like, if I do nothing for the rest of my career, I want to bang that table and get people to understand that part of it. So in the Rams game, they went for it on 4th down, the Rams, against the Seahawks 3 times, all in the first quarter. The first time they did it was 4th and 1, and it was an incomplete pass. They did not convert. The second time that they did it, on 4th and 1 at the 1, they scored a touchdown. The third time that they did it, it was 4th and 1 from the 35. They picked up 34 yards, scored a touchdown 2 plays later. So now they've failed to convert 1 and converted 2 that resulted in touchdowns. So instead of scoring mathematically 9 points off of field goals, they scored 14 points. And they won this game by how many points? By 2. And yet nobody is celebrating any of these things. Also worth mentioning, going back to your field position conversation, another example that we can take out of that game. When they did not convert early in the game, they handed Seattle the ball at their own 8. Seattle's own 8. They had 3 plays on the third play. Sam Darnold throws an interception. You could even argue that maybe the interception is potentially forced because he's trying so hard to get out of the back of his end zone, right? But point being, they didn't go anywhere with that drive. Then when the Rams scored their touchdown and they kicked off, the Seahawks took over at the 35-yard line because it was a touchback and ended up scoring 3 points on that drive. So arguably, because of the benefit of the field position that they got off of the kickoff, they're in better field position to go down the field and kick for 3 points. So if the Rams had kicked there instead of gone for it and scored the touchdown, the scores would have canceled each other out. These are parts of the calculus that people like you guys putting together the binder are taking into consideration that no one wants to think about on their couch. They just want to look at that one play and whether it worked or not. And that's the part that I think frustrates me. And I would imagine Seth might frustrate someone like you as well.
Well, it helps keep me employed. So sometimes I don't mind so much. But I think the part you said at the beginning there, like I think of it as like the attention asymmetry of 4th downs. I think is like a serious part of the reason why it hasn't been embraced as quickly as it otherwise might have. Because like take that 4th and 1 example from the 35. They don't score on that play, right? They just convert that, and a couple plays later they score, you said. So if you're cutting a highlight of that drive, even, let alone the game, what play are you using? You're using the touchdown. When you succeed on 4th downs, you provide the opportunity for a different highlight there. But if you fail, then the highlight is you failing on that play. And so that's why we only talk about it in one direction. And it's exactly like you said, like there's no there's no first take panel on why it was so important for them to go for it on fourth down so that therefore they could score later on that drive. That's not going to happen, but you fail on a fourth down and it can be all we talk about for a whole Monday.
So something I'm also interested in kind of with regards to this is, like you said, people are starting to kind of like pick up on these things, and the discussion is starting to change, hopefully with a discussion like this that we're having. And as we get an influx of teams who are not as talented offensively or don't have as talented offensive play callers as Mike McDaniel or Sean McVay, how we're talking about right now, as those worst teams start to attempt, more 4th and 1s, and probably even more 4th and longs as well. Do you expect that there's going to be a change? I know that perhaps there's been discussion in the academic community about there being selection bias with regards to these 4th downs of where only good teams are really going for it. Do you think that as the influx of going for it on 4th down continues in the next couple of years, that some of this calculus will change, or do you think we've already pretty much hit critical mass as regards to this problem?
So I think the bias would work the other way, where like in the past, worse teams attempted more 4th downs because they're in behind desperate situations and they were forced into it. I would not anticipate that being a thing that shifts dramatically over time.
Going back to the Dolphins example, can you walk me through the win probabilities for that specific scenario and how the field position factors into that specific story? Because I was going back and forth with people on Twitter that were very, very angry, as you can imagine, about McDaniel. And I was trying to argue, here are the things that he's considering that actually ended up playing out in his favor in that game, right? Like all of the things that people on the outside would look at as he got lucky that these things happened are part of the probability model that tells him it's worth taking a chance here and going for it on 4th.
So I think it's a really good one to talk about. And the other reason why I want to talk about this one is because, well, let me give you the numbers first, and then I'll get into it. So we were pro going for it. We gave the Dolphins a 73% chance of winning the game if they attempted a field goal, and a 76.5% chance if they attempted the 4th down.
Okay.
So, right. So we're judging the decision, first of all, not the outcome. And that's a 3.5 percentage point gap. That's large. And I think one thing I hear all the time is like, that's 3%. What does it matter? And when I would say about 3%, this is even larger than that. I'd say like, if you imagine you could start the game and the ref says, would you like to start this game the regular way? Or would you like to guarantee you take a sack on the first play of the game? Well, what would you choose? And the coach says, we want the sack. We would like to start this game on 2nd and 17. It's like, is that devastating to your chances? You can still win that game. Sure. Absolutely. But would choosing to take a sack on the first play of the game make, like, what would fans say? They would say that's absurd. And so that's, I think when we say 3 percentage points, that's when we say like, hey, no, that's a pretty large impact call. Here's what I want to get into about that play though. It's really important to evaluate these decisions on, I think of it as on 2 axes. So one is the win probability. That's the scale of the impact. But the other is the difference in what we call the break-even probability and the conversion probability. So in this case, the key number we had here is 55%. That's the break-even percentage. In other words, the Dolphins would need a 55% chance of converting that 4th and 1 to justify going for it. And we gave them a 64% chance of converting that play. That number, like, honestly, it might be a little high. One of the reasons why our conversion chances look a little high is because we have this penalty asymmetry. If you commit an offensive penalty, you can still kick the field goal. But if you got like a DPI call, then you get a new set of downs. And so there's this asymmetry on the 4th down. So all of our numbers are like, when we say 64%, that's more than an actual conversion rate from the 1. And it's taking into account that penalty asymmetry, though you're less likely to get a DPI on, 4th and 1, you're probably running the ball. So it's possible that number is a shade high. I think that I wouldn't be surprised. But you feel confident that you're over 55%? I think everybody's going to be over 55% in that spot. And so that's where I would say, okay, that gives me more confidence around the right side. Maybe, and there are times, by the way, where I would also say, we say break even chances, it could be anything, 43%, and we're at 44%. And maybe that's even a high leverage moment. So the win probability swing is large. People talk about these like matchup factors, like, oh, we can't be able to run the ball all day. Our right guard is hurt. They're right. And those things can move the needle. I think it's important to recognize they can move the needle, but you got to be close probably to that break even point for that to shift your thinking. When you're talking about a 10-point gap, it's very hard, I think, to justify using one of those matchup factors to change that. And the last thing I'll say about it is, if you do use a matchup factor like that, you got to be willing to do it both ways. You got to be willing to say, hey, well, if maybe we recommend punt here, but you know what? We've been running all over them all day. So yeah, we can go for this in this case. If you're not doing it in both directions, then I think then you're not really being honest with yourself about it and using it as an excuse to be conservative.
Something that also caught my ear was your discussion of asymmetry. And it strikes me that the chance of a safety also has some asymmetry, right? So if you're the offense and you're making a decision to go for it on 4th down on the inch line and you don't get it, your defense then has a chance that they can score, correct?
That's a great point. Honestly, I hadn't really thought about about that. Yeah, you're right. That is that sort of like safety asymmetry. I mean, yes, in general, you have that was part of the value, is that if you fail, you're leaving them in bad field position.
What I hear from people a lot is that the situation at the end of the game, the take the points circumstances is different. I laid out a scenario for you for the Rams game, and all 3 scenarios were in the first quarter, and people will say that's different. There's so much game left. If you have a tie game and a minute 44 to go, and you have a chance to take points, put something on the board that could win the game, as we've established, that wouldn't necessarily have been the case. But if you have the chance to do that, you should do that. Is there any truth to that?
Yes, there is absolutely truth to it. It is a wildly different circumstance, but that's why we model it. So the model, it's not just an expected points model, it's a win probability model. So yeah, of course, it's totally different at the end of the game. There are absolutely circumstances where you could have, 4th and a centimeter, and it would recommend kick, but that doesn't mean that you can't model it. No, that's where you need the model more than anywhere else.
Would those scenarios be there are seconds left on the clock and the other team doesn't have a chance to take over the ball?
Yeah, yes. If we're talking about the inch line, but then if we're farther away from the end zone, also it could factor in as well, right? Like in this case, if you convert the 4th down, you have scored a touchdown, and that is not. If you were at the 10, that wouldn't necessarily be true. If you were facing right? If you were at the 10 and there was less time left, you were facing time constraint, that could matter as well. But yeah, certainly, okay, if they were in the exact same spot on the field, but there was less time left, then yeah, sure, then kick.
Okay. Did the Dolphins make the right decision?
Yes,
in your read?
I think I would be comfortable saying I think they made the right decision. I think it's very fair to say it is possibly more narrow than our numbers might have suggested in that spot. I think we tend to be a shade high right near the goal line, and that to me is totally within the realm, but I don't see how we could get it to where they would be a sub 55% to convert there. And that's really the key question.
Seth Walder, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you walking us through that.
Thanks.
Lindsay, I think that really put into relief how these decisions are made, and also like everything that it's accounted for when it really comes down to how these decisions are made. And obviously it's great for us to feel, confirmed in our feelings about how these decisions need to be made moving forward. But I think Seth did a really, really good job of breaking down like each individual piece and how it moves forward in how these decisions kind of come about.
Yeah, my big thing here is and I knew nothing about data prior to, and still kind of don't in a lot of ways. Like you're a data scientist, this is your thing, right? I did more traditional NFL broadcasting for the majority of my career and have only kind of waded into this area in the last 5 years or so. And I'm curious about why is this thing that you're saying is true? Why is it true? Why is this thing important? Why is this metric better than that metric? Like, and I think my thing with this is that I don't feel like enough people are curious about it. Enough people people are so dug in to like, hey, we've always done this. We should continue doing this. And what I don't understand is why more people aren't saying, why are they doing this? Let me figure out the why behind all of this before I start screaming at the coach for the fact that they're doing it. And maybe I'm even looking at it from a broadcaster's perspective. I mean, you and I think, are on the same page. Like, we both love Greg Olson, partially because he is curious. He clearly comes from a traditional football background, but he has made an effort to understand these ways that data has impacted the decisions that coaches are making on the field, the ways that front offices are making moves now, in ways that I think have clearly made him a better broadcaster for it, because he can explain what's happening. That's what we want from our broadcasters, is to tell us why they did this thing. It doesn't have to be that you agree with it. At the end of the day, I'm fine with every viewer at home going, I wouldn't have done that, Mike McDaniel. But what I want for people to take a second to learn before they come to that conclusion is why he did it. And it's frustrating for me that people look at these decisions and have judgment calls about them when they actually don't know the information behind it.
Right. And I think Seth highlighted two things that were really cool. Number one is that this problem is, I don't want to call it solved, but it is extremely well studied and people are very confident about what the data is saying. And I think he did a really good job of highlighting why that is the way it is, particularly for them at ESPN and kind of the open source as well. And then the second item, kind of piggybacking off of that, is because of what the data says, the narrative has grown. The curiosity that can be dug into, there's more of it. And so really just sitting there and being like, oh, we should have kicked that. That's not the entire story in a narrative-based sport. What the true narrative is, and you mentioned Greg Olson, I think he does a good job of doing this, is like when you line up to kick, you are functionally gaining 3 times whatever the probability of you making that kick is, which is probably high. It's probably like 80, 90%. It's shorter than what the old extra points were. So you're getting what? I mean, like 2.6, 2.7 points. But as Seth said, you're functionally just giving them a point on the flip side by kicking it to the 35. So instead of having a potential safety or making them go the length of the field, and ironically playing the field position game by going for it, what you're really doing is basically putting yourself in a position where you're functionally giving the other team points. And I think that's a better way to think about it. And I think rather than just pointing at the one play, which, that's easy to do for interceptions where it's a massive swing in the game, but like there's so much more to these stories in the game, and there's so much more to these decisions and what it means for the next play or the play after that. And I think when you bring up that Rams example, that's an excellent example of how that's the case. And if you compare and contrast those two decisions, they're really very similar. And I think that's the real difference that people have to realize.
I mean, this same is true for, it's weird that this week kind of had a theme in this regard. The Lions went for it on 4th down. This is a week where that did not work as well as it has for them historically. And people are up in arms about Dan Campbell being stubborn and continuing to stick to a trend that is not working for him in this particular situation. One thing that I would say in response to that is that this is what he always does. And last year, it led to him outscoring his opponents by 222 points, by far the most in the NFL. The next closest I believe was the Eagles at plus 160. Like they're not even in the same ballpark. So clearly this approach works. This is why his teams are dominant the way that they are. You don't get to just pick the one time it didn't work and say, you're a moron because it didn't work this time. Now, that said, zooming out, is there something to be said for him doing that against most opponents, but not doing it in circumstances where the defense, like going back to Shawn's point, right, with the 13 personnel, the 2 tight ends, and like, oh, but the Rams have this really strong defensive front, and most teams don't have that. So the circumstances of one specific game might be, this isn't going to work against them. Don't do it. And I think that that's fair feedback. Is that maybe the case in that situation? Like, are there circumstances where normally we say go for it on fourth with a great deal of frequency, and not all the time. Analytics are not saying that all the time, but a lot of the time. Is it fair to say in this particular case that wasn't smart? Like Lions Eagles this past week.
I think that one of the coolest things that Seth was talking about is like the double axis of how to identify these scenarios. And if I'm Dan Campbell and I have one of the best offenses in the league, even if I am facing a good defense, I believe I can get 2 and 3 yards. Like I played Army and Navy every year, and this is a core tenet of the way that they play, given that they are less talented than everyone else, that they believe they can get 2 and 3 yards. And so if I'm the Detroit Lions and I believe I am more talented than everyone else, that break-even point is much lower than really expected. And really, if you're really looking at the numbers, there's probably a pretty big gap between what you can expect the Detroit Lions to get on an even play, even against the best defenses, as compared to what you would actually need the break-even point to be for an average team. And I think it's very funny. Another interesting thing that he mentioned, we talked about asymmetry a lot, but it kind of went, it was a little subtle, but the Philadelphia Eagles also went for a lot of 4th downs in that game. And because of the asymmetry of penalties, like there was the weird false start penalty. Then all of a sudden they're punting the ball away. And then there was another scenario where they didn't get it, but the tush push is considered a 91 percentile play in getting those 4th downs. So no one even questions those. And so if you really compare the times that, the tush push didn't work twice, there was 2 false starts, one of which was a refereeing error. The other one was one of the tailbacks jumping. When you consider all that stuff, really the Eagles were in a very, very similar spot. And so I think that's why you just have to continue to be aggressive. And the vibes of being aggressive all the time sometimes are even better than the analytics when it really comes down to it.
That Miami game, they don't get it on 4th and 1 at the 1. Washington, they actually lose yards. So Washington takes over at the 3. They end up kicking a 56-yard field goal. And it's no good because it's a long field goal. And it might have been good. Chances are we've seen kickers make 56-yard field goals this year. Yeah. But it's a harder field goal to make than if it had been a 46-yard field goal. Or if this had been a field goal attempt made, kickoff, their average starting field position, I think, was like around the 25 after kickoff, something like that. So let's give them 20 more yards. Let's make it a 36-yard field goal. That's going in. You just canceled it out. Like, that's the thing that I want people to take those extra steps and consider them into the probability factored into that kick, which is, by the way, what the analytics people are doing when they're coming up with the probabilities. So he threw a bunch of win probability numbers out. And I know a lot of people don't understand like what goes into a win probability, but the win probability is factoring in all of that stuff. These things are possible to happen next. So the things that happened next in that Dolphins game weren't just lucky or fluky or whatever. They were part of the calculus.
Exactly.
You don't have to agree. You don't have to agree with the decision, but try to understand.
Right. And I'll even take it a step further. A big discussion throughout the game in the Eagles-Lions game was the weather and how windy it was. And there was a wintry mix at the end of the game. most of the more advanced expected points models, that's also included. So we know that it's hard to pass, and we know that it's hard to kick field goals because we have the weather going back for all these games, and we can understand what the wind is and what the temperature is, and that it's hard to throw and hard to kick. Like, people are working really hard to consider all these things. And so just taking the points is actually not considering all the things that you can try to do. And moreover, most of these decisions, as Seth kind of outlaid with the discussion of the binder or the book, most of these decisions are made on like Tuesdays. Like, they're discussed on Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays as you're going through your scenarios. The head coach, offense coordinator knows what the probability is on first down. They're planning on first, second, third down, how to approach it. So it's very likely not that Mike McDaniel was like, oh, we got to go for it on fourth all of a sudden. They probably on first down were like, okay, we got 4 plays. Let's make it our 4 best plays. And unfortunately it wasn't. But that was a decision made at minimum 3 downs prior to that.
And also, all the models, they're not taking into consideration what the play call is. Right. And in that case, like, that was the part of it that I hated the most. And I'm not necessarily right or wrong like about that. That was just my gut was like, I don't love that call running into the teeth of the defense in that particular situation. But I'm sure that there was a lot that went into the calculus of why they did that too. But like, that's another layer here. If it had been a different play call, maybe the decision to actually go for it on fourth looks a lot smarter, or even is smarter, or whatever. There's just so many moving parts here that I'm like preaching to the choir in this case and definitely shouting into the wind. Like, let's all just take several seats and relax, and then like try to be a little bit more curious about some of these pivots in philosophy here, because there's a lot that's going into it.
And I think there's 2 things that through my entire career in football I've heard. Number one, football is an aggressive game. This is aggressive play.
Right. It's also the epitome of trusting your defense, which is the argument that a lot of times happens to say, just take the points and then trust your defense to get a stop. Well, how about I try to get a touchdown and then I trust my defense to get a stop. Like, the exact same thing is true.
Exactly. And then the third portion, now we're hitting on 3 kind of adages at this point, is like control what you can control. The play call is something you can control. The weather you can't control, down and distance at that particular time can't control. Let the analytics people figure out all the uncontrollables. Let them feed that data back to you, and then you control what you can control. And I think that's the bottom line of these decisions. And honestly, like, going back to the Seahawks Rams game and some of the formation personnel stuff, like, that's really what we're trying to advocate for, is using the data to control what you can control at the end of the day.
Good stuff. We'll be back again next week with more thoughts on the NFL earlier in the week next week. It's obviously a holiday week. It's Thanksgiving already. Week 12 is what we will be discussing then. Look for our show on Monday. For Sam Bruckhouse and Matt Stopsky, who is behind the scenes right now, I'm Lindsay Rhodes. We'll see you again next time.